Good afternoon. Yes, to get my excuses in first, I'm far too tall, and my relationship with my feet is quite peripheral, so I managed to fall down some stairs yesterday in parenting activities. So I'm going to stand here and try not to fall over, and hopefully you won't notice the epic amount of pain meds which are flowing through my brain right now. So what I wanted to do was to sort of anchor this a little bit in an analysis of how the workplace is changing and what that means for our learning needs and also how we do learning in organizations. So first of all, I think, to go way, way back, the whole sort of management consulting industry, management theory, and the whole education of leaders in large and medium-sized organizations today is really based on the constraints of the late 19th century. In other words, in the building of the US railroads, there was no technology more complex than the telegraph to coordinate standardization across distance and time. And so this sort of model of the cascading hierarchical org chart that we sort of take for granted today was largely a product of technology constraints, not necessarily the best solution even at the time. And I think what we're seeing today is that there's a widespread recognition that that structure in itself is probably the biggest barrier to creating the sort of agile, adaptive, modern, high-tech organizations that we want to see today. It's not to say that hierarchy will magically disappear, but we don't need to use hierarchy for communication, and we don't need to use hierarchy for the coordination of work. We have far better solutions. And so I think it's useful to start there because I think much of what goes wrong in conventional learning today starts from a similar place. So we used to believe that managers could predict the future and plan our way towards a good outcome over 1 year, 3 years, or 5 years. Now we think in terms of the need to sense and respond. We need organizations which are always changing a little bit, always adapting to external stimuli and conditions. And I think that's a useful thing to bear in mind. Now, there's a temptation just to go straight to connected products and build autonomous vehicles and drones and all this cool stuff that we're seeing. But I think it's worth understanding that you can't produce connected products and services if you're not yourself a connected organization. So in other words, whenever you see a large bank launching a new app and it's all sort of whizzy and it's all cool, behind the scenes, unfortunately, is still this sort of Dickensian call center culture and process management that means that, beyond an initial conversation on Twitter, you're still going to get pushed back into a terrible experience. So we need to see transformation as something that goes all the way through our organizations. It's about optimizing the way we work today, using better technology and more connected ways of working. Then it's about transforming the way we work, so that we do the right thing in the right way. And then finally, it's about the new products and services and ecosystems and partnerships that can emerge from that sort of world. Now, for me, there's a really simple sort of metaphor that I like to use about this, which is to consider the way that software has evolved over the last 10 to 15 years. So, back when I was starting out sort of writing and stuff, Windows 3.1 and all this sort of dreadful enterprise software was the norm. And that's really all we had. And software at that point was vertically integrated. It was like one product. It either did the job or it didn't do the job, and you sort of threw it away and bought another one if it didn't do the job. And what's happened over time is from a position of sort of highly functional and vertically integrated, software has moved to a layer cake of individual service layers that build up from the sort of lowest level of data, application logic, sort of user experience, front end, and so on. And so what happens now is we don't throw our software away. If you look at something like Facebook, on your phone or on your laptop, there are tiny tweaks going on to the front end of Facebook on an almost daily basis. But the big changes in terms of the privacy models or the data structure, they are very occasional. So you've got this sort of pace layering effect that means that you can evolve a structure in a very connected way. And we have this notion of APIs, sort of interfaces between services that mean that you can pull together a clever service over here, a clever service over here with a front end over here and create an entirely new experience for people. And for me, this is the way that I see organizations evolving. I think we're going to move to what we call a sort of service-oriented architecture for organizations and away from this obsession with sort of top-down process compliance. And this is highly relevant, I think, to learning because the big difference between a process world and a service world is that a process world believes that you train people once, as long as they comply with the process is perfect, just leave them to work like sort of battery chickens in their cubicles, running that process over and over again until such a point as we have a catastrophic failure, and then we'll redesign the process and we'll go through that all over again. In a service-oriented world, you've got people sitting behind services who are monitoring the outcomes, the feedback, the statistics, the sort of customer satisfaction on close to real-time levels, and they're doing whatever it is they can do to improve that particular service. And that sort of evolutionary approach to gradual small improvements is something that means you need to learn all the time. You don't just get trained in the process at the beginning and then run it like you're doing fries, on a McDonald's sort of service line. And that's a big change in the way that we think about organizations, both structurally and culturally, because there will be no HR empire that can tell people what to do. There will be no central corporate IT that gives you the most expensive but most terrible user experience available. These sort of support structures won't have power in the organization of the future. They will provide services to us, people who are sort of at the front of the house delivering things for customers. So for me, this model is almost a universal design pattern today. In everything we see, from our TVs to our phones, even to our cars, we see a tightly controlled platform that manages the underlying services very conservatively, high security, focus on privacy, etc. And then on top, we have variety in all the various apps that we can use that consume the services of the platform to deliver us a good experience. So to give you an example, I can't change iOS on my phone, nor should I be able to, but I can choose from a million different apps that use the services that iOS exposes to give me whatever it is I'm looking to do, whatever sort of experience I want to have. And in business, this has become a really powerful architecture. Probably the best example, I think, is the Chinese firm Haier, which is very well case studied in the literature. They've sort of inverted their management pyramid, and they've created a platform that serves a plethora of micro businesses on that platform. But the best known example is Amazon. Amazon organize everything in this sort of service-oriented way. Small teams focus obsessively on, one sort of widget on a web page and look at the numbers and do whatever they can to make it improve. And even when Amazon built its own sort of computing power, they did that in the same way. Highly standardized, incredibly powerful and scalable services, but super cheap, easy to use, and you can pick them up, mix and match, and run your own sort of AWS or EC2 cloud computing infrastructure. So it's a really, really powerful model, and it enables scale with no loss of quality for companies like Amazon and companies like Haier. And for me, if I look at the sort of alternative to the functionally divided, hierarchically organized company structure that we have today, it would look something like that. It would be a shared service platform of individual services, things that the company does. And behind the scenes, we'd have people whose only job is learning how to improve those services in real time. And in the sort of front of house world, we have all kinds of teams working with customers, working with partners to take these services and compose them and combine them into a wonderful customer experience or a new service or a new product. And the reason I share this, which probably sounds more like nerdy organizational development than learning at this point, is because that to me is what a learning organization looks like, right? So it's not just a collection of processes run by semi-sociopathic management class who are sort of pursuing hierarchical promotion. It's actually a machine, but it's a machine that allows people working on top to behave in a much more free-form, autonomous, and creative way. So if you're serving customers, you have this palette of services that you can draw from, and you can do whatever it is within the constraints of that platform that allow you to meet customer needs or invent a new product or whatever. So at the back, people are constantly learning how to improve the services, and at the front, people are constantly learning how to meet customer needs using those services. They're not just following the process, and I think that's the really big change that I see in an organization. And if you believe even sort of halfway in that sort of future, then obviously that has a lot of implications for the way that we do training and learning in the organization today. And that's hopefully what I'll talk about. So I do a lot of, I get involved in a lot of sort of large-scale change and transformation programs in big companies, mostly big European industrial companies, but in the UK also sort of financial services and professional services and so on. And I've been doing it for a very long time. And what I've found is that if you think about the role of learning in these initiatives or in these challenges, there are three really basic sort of problems that hold back positive organizational transformation today. The first is just the terrible level of digital skills and confidence in the workforce, and the sort of digital culture gap that exists, where for some reason people go to work and they think that their job just involves, you know, I don't know what, using a paper process or doing stuff, and somehow technology is like an optional extra. It's not really core to what they do, and they need oodles and oodles of training and support before they can even change the way they do things. The second problem is the sort of, you know, well, two things really. First of all, it's a lack of peer-to-peer shared socialized learning. You know, we're still too obsessed with the sort of top-down provision model of spoon-feeding training and learning, and also very much a one-size-fits-all sort of approach. And I think the third, and probably the most important problem that's holding us back, is the role of leaders. Many senior leaders in organizations today are afraid of technology, don't really understand new ways of working, and they protect themselves from that by not engaging with it, and continuing to operate in a very sort of Stone Age way in terms of just issuing instructions, using power relations in the hierarchy to get things done, and so on. And unless we can positively engage with senior leaders, get them working in a new and better way, we can't create an example for everyone else. And so everything that you try and do in terms of organizational change is more difficult. Now, there is some good news in terms of the leadership challenge, which is that there will be far fewer of them in the future. So if you think about automation, we typically think, oh, automation, it's going to take away loads of low-end, repeatable jobs. Well, possibly yes, but it will also take away a vast swathe of middle management, because there is no shortage of slightly portly middle-aged men who know how to run meetings and know how to make you feel bad about yourself if they don't like what you're doing. We have, you know, an almost infinite supply of those in societies like the UK right now. Now, if your job involves sort of carrying information from one place to another and telling people off, well, computers are pretty good at doing that. And actually, people are pretty good at self-managing as well if you give them the opportunity to do so. So I think that we're going to see a sort of algorithmic replacement of much of the management meat that occupies chairs and consumes biscuits and so on in organizations. And it's going to be wonderful, because it's going to free up the organization, it's going to let people get on and do things much more quickly, and it's going to avoid this sort of what they call the marshmallow effect, where anything new or experimental gets sort of stuck in this middle management marshmallow that sort of runs the organization largely for its own purposes in many cases. So, you know, these sad Tokyo salary men are going to go off to the bar one last time, have a good old drink, and then hopefully find something more creative to do with the rest of their lives. A related problem, because it's not just leaders that have this problem, is this sort of learned helplessness that we take for granted in organizations today. You know, at home, none of you like phone up a helpline and require training to use Facebook or to do a Google search, you know, or even to do some quite complex stuff. And yet, somehow, when we get to the workplace, we sort of sit there, you know, believing that unless we're trained in the new system or, you know, we're given loads of emotional support to do something different, we can't do it. And it's a really puzzling thing. I don't blame individual employees for this. I think this is largely a product of the system and the way that we treat people. So it's this sort of infantilization of the workforce and the sort of culture of top-down provision of IT and top-down provision of training. That sort of leads people to this position of learned helplessness. But it's a big problem. You know, I think we need to start from a slightly different place, and we need to say, okay, what's the minimum level of digital skills and digital literacy that any employee needs in this organization today? Let's sort of draw a line at a reasonable level, so we're not including AI or machine learning or anything like that, but we are including, you know, being able to wipe your face and do all the basics online. And fundamentally, if you don't hit that level, why are you here? I mean, really, because if we want to absorb the next 5 or 10 years, investing millions in training highly reluctant sort of, chair potatoes just to slightly change the way they do things, then I think we're going to miss the opportunity that we have in front of us. So yes, support where needed, training even where needed, but we need to have a higher minimum standard on digital skills if we're going to go forward. And I think related to that, let's not have change or learning programs that try and teach everyone in exactly the same way, or indeed believe that everybody is teachable or rescuable. Let's focus on the willing ones. I do some leadership development programs, and if you start from the position that you're going to try and get every leader modernized and up to scratch, you'll be there forever. So you have to pick the smart ones, or the willing ones, or the younger ones, or whoever is motivated to improve. Focus all your efforts on them, and then let the power of sort of influence in networks bring another third of the population with them, but because they imitate what these people are doing, they want to follow them, they want the same sort of goodness that they're experiencing. And let's be realistic, some people won't join the journey at all, and so we just sort of manage them, and nature will do the rest over time. I play games. Just finished Far Cry, great game, if any of you are into that sort of thing. And what you see on a gaming forum is within 24 hours of a new complex game coming out, there is a wealth of learning material available for all people at all levels. People have created guides to the weapons, they've created maps of the territory, tips, tricks, cheat sheets, you name it, they create it. Why? Because they're motivated to do so. And that really is the key to learning, I think, is you either want to do it or you don't. And you can lead a horse to water, etc., but you can't, train a passive workforce who is allowed to get away with not changing or adapting or upgrading themselves. So for me, there's a lot of lessons we can take from areas of high motivation, whether it's gaming, whether it's sort of, international development, solving real-world problems. There are so many contexts in which people learn really quickly, and they can learn quite complex things and then share it with each other. So there are no community managers, doing this on the Far Cry forums. It's gamer to gamer. It's people solving each other's problems and doing things that others want to imitate or to copy. So I think there's a lot we can learn from that sort of motivational model in the learning that we do. But also, I think we need to sort of give back the responsibility for personal development to the individual. It's all very nice having our happiness at work programs and our la-di-da programs and probably some hugger or other lovely Scandinavian concepts and so on. But, fundamentally, the individual needs to sort of own their own destiny. And so, yes, help them, support them, but actually explicitly tell them that it's their job to continually update their skills if they want opportunities in the organization. Because it's much easier that way, it's much cheaper, and people with the motivation are able to do that. There's a friend of mine, Luis Suarez, was a pioneer in IBM of social computing and so on, and he did this experiment for years, actually, where he refused to use email, and he only used social forums, IBM connections, wikis, that sort of thing. And what was interesting was IBM went through a massive round of layoffs, and there were these institutionalized sort of, middle-aged guys for the most part in IBM who were all getting laid off. And he said, well, where's your personal network? And they're like, what do you mean? I'm an IBMer, IBM looks after me. He said, well, you're a fool because you should have been cultivating your personal network both inside the organization and outside, and updating your skills and showing off those skills. And those individuals that did that, they were not wanting for a new job or a new opportunity. It was there and it happened. And I think that's part of taking responsibility for how we develop ourselves rather than wait for HR or learning and development to do it to us. So that was a rambling introduction, some of my views on organizational change. But what does this mean about what we need to learn today? And the reason I start there is that for the most part, in the organizations that I'm sort of exposed to, the learning needs are changing faster than the ability of learning providers or HR and L&D departments to actually retool and keep up. And so it's a real challenge. First of all, obviously, we're not just talking about skills. This is, I don't know if, probably some of you have read Harold Jarche's work. It's very good on personal knowledge management and what he calls life in perpetual beta. But he talks about lifelong learners covering this sort of autonomy, competence, and relatedness. as areas of development, and it's some very good thinking behind it. I would definitely recommend his work. So some of these other skills, community management, sort of networking, influence, network-centric collaboration, all of these things are just as important as learning new tools or learning new skills, and they're probably more important. I think probably the most important skill is double loop learning, the idea that you can learn how to learn. And that's the sort of thing that really is in the realm of, teach a person to fish sort of territory. If you can impart those sorts of higher order skills, then there's a lot less training and learning needed down the line. So where I start with the people that I work with is begin with an analysis of what's changing, what's affecting the organization from the outside, whether that's market changes, customer changes, tech changes, whatever it might be. And then ask, okay, what does this mean for our sector and what does this mean specifically for our organization? And then what I do, because a bit of a nerd, is work inwards from there to define the really important capabilities that the organization needs to have in order to meet those challenges. And then I sort of dig in and we look at, okay, well, what skills, what software systems, what data, what processes do you have that you can organize to create these new target capabilities that represent future need states for the organization. And skills and learning are very much a part of that, because it's all very well having cool new tech and software and so on, but if you can't do the human side of it, then you're not going to get very far. So we dig into that, define the capabilities, and put a lot of focus on the skills and learning needs to operate that new capability in the right sort of way. And that gives us one set of sort of targets for a learning program. And then also look the other way and sort of map what already exists in the organization in terms of talent, skills, mindsets, competencies, however you want to sort of mix and match those related concepts, and sort of group them, look at their current state, look at where they need to be, and then you've got a second set of learning needs that you can sort of target with a learning program. And the other bit that's often missing, because we tend to focus on these sort of very granular, individual skills, is the hybrids. So, every big law firm today is looking for lawyers who can code. Every big accountancy is looking for accountants that are good with data or accountants that understand AI. There's a whole range of hybrid skills, often between a traditional discipline and sort of more modern tech that organizations need to have if they're to move forward and develop. So how are these new technologies changing the way we learn? Gartner, hype cycle, blah, blah, blah. I'm sure lots of people are talking about VR face masks and blockchain-connected IoT widgets and all this kind of stuff. And obviously the learning field is full of these innovations, and some of them are good and some of them are silly. But actually, I'm going to keep it pretty low-tech and simple, because what I want to describe is stuff that you can do today with what you probably already have in your digital workplace. I think it's easy to get distracted by the bubblegum of wandering around with VR headsets all the time and stuff. And outside of very specific medical or engineering applications, I don't think that stuff is the future of learning in the workplace. The digital workplace has evolved over time. It's still not great. It's still largely things like Office 365 and SharePoint and IBM Connections and Jive and maybe Slack if you're lucky, maybe some other modern communicational collaboration tools. But what's good about today is that there's an acceptance now that we're not just looking for one tool to rule them all. We're not just going to have SharePoint and that's all you get, or IBM Connections and that's all you get. We tend to have a more diverse digital workplace environment these days. And that means people need to get comfortable with different tools. But also, I think it means that we can start to do different types of collaboration in different ways. So we always talk about the three main levels of intimacy and scale of collaboration. So first, you want to get your team stuff right. The people you work with in real time, day to day, sort of 10, 20 people, whatever it is, using something like Slack or Microsoft Teams or something real time that can act as an integration point is a very powerful way of building efficient teams today. Then at the sort of middle level, when you're working with departments or people you may not know directly and personally, you've got things like enterprise social networks, and you've got wikis, and you've got things like IBM Connections and Jive. And then at the sort of organization-wide level, there's low intimacy, high scale, and really it's about finding people in networks. So it's about search behaviors, it's about networking behaviors, and it's about creating artifacts, whether those are documents or wiki pages or websites or whatever it is. And these three different levels need different skills, and so they're very different types of collaboration. And I don't see very many organizations who are sort of sophisticated enough today to teach people anything about how you work at those different levels. And they are very, very different levels with different expectations. The other thing that I think is where the digital workplace can support learning in a better way is that, in reality, I think most work and learning happens within informal structures and informal networks. And so we have this new class of informal connected tools that we can use to organize that sort of work. And the other thing that means is that learning in the flow of work, in other words, not sort of stopping your work and going over here to do some learning, but actually learning on the spot, that's a lot more powerful, and it tends to embed and sustain much more effectively. And that's what these tools do allow you to achieve if you use them in a smart way. So I think informal, social learning in the flow of work is really how most of us actually acquire new skills or new learning these days. But of course, again, it's not just about skills. We also need to look at sort of mindsets and assumptions and behaviors. The problem with this is that we tend to, again, blame the employees. We tend to think, oh, you need to have a growth mindset, or, you need to do this. Well, the system creates the behaviors. And so if you want to change the behaviors, change the system. Treat people like grown-ups, give them a bit more autonomy, a bit more choice, let them choose their own tool set, for example, and you might stimulate a change in those mindsets. So on a very practical level, one of the things that I enjoy doing immensely at the moment is helping organizations create a sort of peer-to-peer learning hub right at the center of their digital workplace. So something which is not IT support information, nor is it sort of training or learning information. It's much more informal than that. It's usually a collection of use cases and sort of documentation of how different people have solved problems using a combination of these tools. One of the things we do, which is a bit like gamers, is sharing loadouts. So gamers will go and say, oh, my best weapon combination is this one and this one and this one, and it's really cool, etc. Well, actually, there are different ways to solve problems in the workplace today using different tools. And so somebody might say, well, actually, I use the wiki to get my thoughts down, but then when I want to share it, I put it on Slack. And somebody else might say, no, I prefer working in documents with SharePoint and then just letting people know via an email list. So let people share the ways they're solving problems. Let them learn from each other in a sort of peer-to-peer learning community. And if you want to go the extra sort of mile or the extra step and do something innovative, then what we recommend is creating a digital concierge bot, something that lives in your chat systems like Slack or Teams or Skype for Business, that you can just ask questions to. You can say, oh, how do I do this? Or what tool is good for that? And it can search all of the content on the Learning Hub, or it can put you in touch with digital guides, sort of informal ambassadors who are perhaps a bit more advanced, working within the different areas of the organization, who can help you or mentor you or coach you. And that combination of really good sort of community-curated content with some smart sort of search and the ability to find it in context with the personal touch of the individual digital guides, we find to be the best combination to rapidly accelerate learning on the digital workplace and get people using the tools in a smart way and thereby impart some useful skills to them. We also, I think, need more sort of fluid, more personal tools for learning. So, again, not taking people out of their scheduled day, but just letting them sort of maybe grab or bookmark a few things along the way, and then have a tool to organize that into a little learning journey later on. I'm sort of a Wikipedia. I'm one of these Wikipedia obsessives where if someone shares an article about, 13th century Poland, then, I've gone all the way back to 2000 BC. On Wikipedia before I sort of wake up out of that. But I will grab those articles and I'll bookmark them and save them in a little learning journey for later on so that when I've got spare half an hour, I can actually learn about the history of Neolithic Poland and what that caused in the early part of their life. So that's something that I know a lot of people like to do, but they just lack the tool confidence or the tools in the workplace to do that. But it's simple. We've had bookmarking services and shared bookmarking services now for like 15 years or so. And I think the other part of that in terms of the tools is better curation tools. If you live in a world of sort of real-time chat with Slack and Teams and stuff, which if you don't already, I sincerely hope you will very soon, because it's a very productive way of working, then there's a load of noise, there's a load of chatter, and sometimes you need to be able to pick some nuggets out of that, or pick some actionable items out of that, and then curate it into a longer form story that can be shared. So in other words, sort of project learning, in the heat of battle, so to speak, within a project, you're going to get all these little learnings and things. And if you can find a way of pulling those out, almost storifying them. Anyone use Storify before that went down? That was a way that you could organize a load of tweets to sort of retrospectively show a story from the tweets. So we need something like that in the workplace. There's a tool called Elium, which is a Belgian-Swiss company that have a nice knowledge-sharing tool that does something similar. But I think we're going to see many more of those. Another sort of practical point is around learning circles. When I built my first sort of learning platform 20 years ago or something, we used to talk about group-based learning and double loop learning and all this kind of stuff. And if you look at the practice of things like working out loud, that's basically that's what it is. It's essentially a personal learning circle. So working out loud is this sort of, anyone know working out loud? Come across the ideas? Yeah, just one. That's a few. Working out loud is the idea that you narrate your work, and that creates ambient awareness among your colleagues. It creates greater alignment with your team, and it shows how smart you are. And so there have been a few books throughout the years. The latest one by John Stepper, who was at Deutsche Bank, details a sort of a practice of working out loud circles, where you sort of recruit a few friends and you once a week get together for an hour and you do some learning together, and then you join other circles and learn other things. Somehow that practice has absolutely taken off in Germany. So colleagues of mine in Bosch have used it extensively. There have been hundreds and hundreds of learning circles using working out loud in Bosch. Then it's spread to Daimler, it's spread to Deutsche Bank, Deutsche Telekom, it's all over the place. And it's even quite popular, I think, in the UK these days as well. So it's an interesting one to have a look at and read up on, but it does show the informal group-based nature of learning at its best, I think. And going back to this idea of the sort of concierge, if you start to create sort of chatbots at work that are linked to learning, there's so many things they can do. They can ask people what they think their learning needs are. They can do surveys better than surveys. They can help people find information. They can share stories and so on and so forth. But actually, I think one of the most powerful things that we will return to is an old idea from the 1990s of sort of personal search agents. In other words, a little bot that gets to know you, knows what you're interested in, and just goes off around the intranet or goes off around the organization and finds things and organizes it for you into little learning journeys, so that you've got a sort of a throughput of interesting stuff that you might want to learn from. We do something similar but a little bit more basic, where we use bots to do diagnostics. So we do this with leaders a lot. So take a whole group of leaders, run them through a diagnostic, answering questions with the bot, having a sort of conversation, and then get a sense of where they are against the organization's targets, and then put together a sort of personalized learning journey, based on the results of that diagnostic that they can see in real time, just at the point where they finish using it. So I think there's a lot you can do, and I do think that bots, although they're overhyped and there's going to be this trough of disappointment as we overload expectations on them, I think they're actually a very powerful personal tool, and I think within the digital workplace, they could do some really cool stuff. But the problem with AI and anything vaguely related to AI is you've got to have connected systems and connected data for it to make any sense. You can't live in an old Dickensian sort of hierarchy run by processes and somehow create a magical sort of AI across the piece. So there is some work to be done, I think, with our systems and our networks to make that possible. And just final word on AI, just to say about AI, I think the goal here is not sci-fi levels of automation and replace people with robots and stuff like that. The goal is augmented human intelligence. In other words, humans are primary, they are the best. It's speciesist, but anyway, they're probably the best. And what we need to do is just sit them on top of really smart tech to do all the boring stuff, take away the drudge work, and let them use their creativity. So the reason for this image is this was the moment that Garry Kasparov in 1997 realized that he could no longer beat computers. And he basically stopped trying at that point and then got into what he calls centaur chess, which is teams of people using teams of AIs to play the best possible chess. And so the best chess players in the world over the last 10 years have been teams of people using technology, not technology on its own. And for me, that's the sort of relationship that I think we're going to see in the workplace. And it does suggest a whole other area of learning as well, because if you look at car fabrication factories or lots of production lines, you're now seeing the return of humans onto those lines where they used to be entirely automated. Now they're bringing back what they call cobots, like little friendly robots who are quite safe to be around, and you get the optimum combination of human intuition and ingenuity with the robot doing the very precise stuff. And so learning how to work in a mixed human-machine environment is also going to be an interesting challenge. You know, the etiquette of that, et cetera, is quite fascinating. So very briefly, the final thing that I wanted to mention is this leadership learning challenge, because I think at the moment that is really holding us back in all the cases that I can see. So I think, first of all, we need to do this hierarchy bypass operation. So we need to sort of teach leaders that there are better ways, even for them, to run their teams, achieve their goals, and manage sort of outcomes in the organization. And so maybe we teach them about, you know, the Spotify organizational structure, or the Morningstar structure, or the medium structure, or any of these new emerging structures which are proving to be better than hierarchies. Teach them how to shift from, you know, compliance with the process to encouraging people to focus on outcomes and improve the services that they run. Teaching them about agile, continuous improvement, lean methodologies, all these sorts of things, and multimodal leadership. You know, the idea that you can be sort of ambidextrous. You can exploit the existing day-to-day work, and you can explore new avenues of work, and you can do those things pretty much at the same time with the same people in the same teams, and also teach these notions of, you know, followership and influence rather than just authority and sort of sharp-elbowed politics, which is what they've been taught is the right way to manage. But I think we also need to be a bit challenging, and we need to tell them that, you know, your job is not just to enjoy the perks and to tell people what to do. You're a custodian of the organization, and so really you should leave behind a better organization than the one that you found. And that means that you need to be always learning, and don't be afraid to show that vulnerability or show that you still have things to learn. This is Dieter Zetsche. He's the head of Daimler, Mercedes, etc. And he's actually quite a cool dude. He's always learning new things. This is him in an interview with the CEO of NVIDIA, who produced the chips behind autonomous driving and AI and all that kind of stuff. And you know, Dieter went to Austin, Texas for South by Southwest, put on cowboy boots and a hat, and, you know, just went there to learn. And he learned a hell of a lot of new stuff. And there aren't that many leaders, certainly some of the dull people that you see on these exposés of Big Four accounting scandals and so on. You know, there aren't that many senior leaders that I can think of in the UK who have that sort of openness to work with young people, to learn from them, to pick up new skills and stuff. So that sort of culture really matters, and I think it, you know, if we can instill that sort of culture in our leaders, then we'll be doing a really good job. And I think, you know, going back to the working out loud point, we need to give them the confidence to be more of a social animal in the workplace and share what they are learning and what they need to learn to encourage others to do the same. I think that's quite important. But, and we've seen some great successes there with reverse mentoring programs, for example, in large organizations, teaming them up with a younger person so they get to learn the experience of the leader, and the leader gets to learn something about tech or living in the modern world or craft beers or hipster foods, I don't know, whatever they want to talk about. And there are some good sort of group-based learning programs that I've seen as well for leaders. But I think fundamentally it needs to be more challenging. I've done some really interesting learning programs with some sort of corporate education units of universities and so on that have been well-funded, you know, great experience, live TV events, you know, all kinds of amazing things. But I think what it comes down to really is the sort of human touch and the coaching. And so, you know, the best results I've had is when I get to just do, you know, 5 or 6 hours of sort of coaching with a senior leader and just really take them through real-world examples of how to apply this sort of theory and these sort of ideas to challenges and problems that they face in the day-to-day. But, you know, if I'm being critical for a moment, I would say that too many of the HR-led learning programs for leaders are a bit fluffy. So we take them all off-site, give them some nice food, and they spend 2 days learning Twitter. It's like, oh, bless. Two days and 100 grand for you to learn something that you should already know, probably. You know, imagine if a call center worker did, I'm just going to spend 50 grand and spend 2 days learning how to use a telephone. You know, they wouldn't last very long. And yet our expectations of leaders in technology are so low that we actually do this and we think it's good. I think we need to go way further than that, and we need to say, okay, look, table stakes, you need to do some reading and learn some technology. Then what we can help you with is how you apply that to the challenge of leadership, cultivating a learning organization, cultivating the sort of culture that we want to see in a modern organization today. And I think that's really important. So unfortunately, my experience suggests that without doing that work with leaders, you know, the whole sort of digital transformation, change programs, etc., not doomed to fail, but they're always going to be hitting a sort of a glass ceiling, because eventually people say, hold on, I'm using these new tools and I'm working in this way. What about them? They're just retreating into a boardroom and making decisions in a very traditional way. And you know, I see a lot of that, and I think that's a big problem. So in terms of briefly wrapping up, so that we've got a little bit of time to have a chat if you want to, I would say, you know, even a relatively basic digital workplace environment and some of the new tools that you can use today is potentially a wonderful place to start for transforming learning in the organization. Things like peer-to-peer learning hub and groups, guides and bots around the digital workplace to really accelerate people's technology learning and their confidence and their skills. I think that's doable today. It's not some kind of special new tech. I think a lot more informal curation of content. So in other words, pulling in lots of different sources, some of which are learning and some of which are not. They're just informal information sources, and giving people tools to just organize that stuff and build their own learning journeys. I think that should be you know, a key part of how people work. And I think, you know, skipping ahead a little bit, I think what we're going to see is that learning will no longer be a separate activity, which is scheduled, it takes place over here in a classroom. You know, we will just have in our daily schedules the expectation that we always are trying to do a little bit of learning, and it just always takes place in the context of where the work is. Specialist skills and training, you know, of course, will still continue to be needed, but all of the basic workplace stuff that we're so far behind on today, we should be able to accelerate if we change our expectations in terms of the workforce, if we set the bar a little higher in terms of what the minimum standards are, and I think if we give power back to people to organize a lot of their learning for themselves. And then let's stop being too soft on our leaders in terms of our leadership development and learning, and let's really challenge them to play an active and grown-up role in sort of transforming the organization to something that's more effective and a better place to work in. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Lovely, thanks very much. Are you all right standing over there?
Yes, I'll stand stock still.
Focus point for everybody. And it's